Red-faced and sweating with the effort, Abby Finch stabbed at the deep tap root, imagining that it was her soon-to-be ex-husband on the receiving end of her spade. Damn, damn, damn! The word echoed the jabbing, until beneath her raised spade, the white glimmer of bone brought her to a juddering halt. It wasn't the first time she'd disturbed the bones of a long-deceased pet, but the shock never lessened. She stuck her spade into the pile of earth she'd already removed and walked away, stretching her back, ripping off her gloves to scoop up some hair that had escaped the scrunchie and was sticking to her face. Restoring this forgotten corner of the garden, where he'd made love to her, proposed to her, for the new woman in his life, was Howard's punishment for defying him not once, but twice. He might be done with her as a wife, but she was still useful in the garden, and with 3 children whose needs would always make her hostage to his demands, she'd had no choice but to concede. For the moment, he had her over a barrel, but she took some comfort from the fact that she'd have an unlikely ally in Izzy Hamilton. Once the divorce was sorted, and Izzy was the new Mrs. Finch, she wouldn't want her predecessor hanging around in the garden. With that thought to console her, Abby took a steadying breath, and gloves back on and down on her knees, she reached into the cool, damp earth and took out a rib bone. It was a fragile thing, tiny against the clumsy thickness of her gardening gloves. She placed it carefully on the path beside her, and then, using her hand fork, began to carefully scrape away the soil. The animal had lain undisturbed until the roots of the rose had breached the box in which it had been buried, forcing it apart and curling through the ribs, scattering the neat curve of tiny vertebrae. It had been wrapped in a knitted blanket, rotting now, with soil clinging to the strands of wool. There were damp-pitted brass hinges, and from a piece of the lid that had survived, she could see that it had once been inlaid with the same coloured wood and mother-of-pearl that she was turning up with her fork. She put everything she found on the path, beside the fragments of blanket and the bones, so that she could reinter it all together. Then she found the skull.